Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good, good. Well, welcome to the lively discussion, Great Expectations, leading library staff through the minefield of continuous change. My name is Denise Novak. I'm the acquisitions librarian at the Carnegie Mellon University Libraries in Pittsburgh. And presenting with me is Seeman, the Kresge Library director at the Stephen M. Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. We're going to talk to you about change for a few minutes, and then we would like to hear from you, because both Corey and I are hoping for a lively discussion and to hear about the challenges that you're facing in your institutions. They always say that time changes things, but you actually have to change them yourself. This is a quote from a famous Pittsburgher I'm sure you all know, Andy Warhol. Every one of us in this room has dealt with change. Whether in our personal lives or at work, change is the one constant in our lives. I'd like to talk to you about 5 factors of change which influence how we manage and deal with change in the workplace. The first factor is the nature of change, how we try to control it. Change is a part of our lives, both internally in our private lives and externally in our work or other outside forces. How we handle that change lies within our own personal experience. These changes may be low-key and easy, or challenging and stressful. We may meet change with grace and acceptance, or with hostility, anger, and resistance. Change transpires when we decide to accept a change. This means we move from the passive state of just watching how things unfold to taking some action that enables us to utilize the change to create an outcome of our own choice. Shifting our focus from what happens, the event themselves, or to what we do, what happens, is another way to describe transition. Ultimately, the way we make change is our personal choice and responsibility. An example for me that I think that we can all agree with as change is moving to a new ILS system. The transition is usually welcome. At the same time, it's challenging and frightening. The outcome is a better system for all constituents, but of course, getting there is not so easy. The second factor is the process of change, or the mechanisms involved in change. Every change effort should be accompanied by an action plan. Sometimes there will be a project manager who will direct the trajectory of the change, and although each action plan for change will be unique, all plans should follow a basic structure of identification of a course of action, designation of the authority, responsibility, and relationships that will drive the change effort, determination of who will lead the change effort and the specific roles and responsibilities of these individuals, a description of the procedures and processes that will expedite implementation of the change, identification of the training that will be required to enable people to incorporate the change into their work processes, and identification of the equipment that will affect the way the work is accomplished. Many, if not all, changes come from the leadership of the organization. These changes come to the rest of the organization via email or a meeting. It's up to the middle managers, team leaders, whatever they're called these days, to garner support from their staff. However, a common misconception about carrying out a change is that it must be directed from the top. The foundation of successful change lies in involving the people who will be affected by that change. 3 years ago, my institution made the decision to move to a new ILS, and thank God it was very, very needed. Prior to the decision, I had talked to my team about looking at a new acquisitions or serials module that we could implement to help us with our work. So I arranged to have some demos by a couple of companies to come in so that my staff could see what kind of technologies were out there. Well, suddenly, after posting this message, I got an email from my dean who wanted to know why there wasn't going to be a full demonstration of either the EBSCO Folio or Alma Primo VE or something else. And so all of a sudden I was planning great big demos for all of the staff. And the staff attended all the demos. We were asked for our input, the good, the pros, the cons of these new ILS, and a decision was made, and it was made by the leadership of the library. So this slide shows an example of the key roles in a change project, which are executives and senior managers, middle managers and supervisors, the change management resource team, who answers to the other 4 outlying circles, the project team, and the project support functions. Communication is very important in a change project. Communication must reach the staff in a personal way. Staff need to know what's happening, why it's happening, and how they will be affected during and after the change has been implemented. Communication can be facilitated in many ways. Oral and written communication, along with tutorials, are ways to disseminate information. When we began the move to the new ILS, an implementation team was appointed to work with the vendor's implementation team. As a part of that team, I knew I would want to keep the acquisitions and serial staff informed and ready to test the system. In addition, and this is more empathetic, I wanted to be available to answer questions and concerns that my staff might want to bring to me. The 4th factor is the culture of change and how the organizational culture affects change. What the library values as an organization builds and shapes this culture, which in turn molds and prescribes members' actions. Culture can impede or facilitate change, unite or divide members, and cause the library to achieve or fail at its mission. For these reasons, organizational culture is an important concept for librarians to understand. Organizational culture is a set of shared values and beliefs that are learned and are all-encompassing. The learning of culture can occur through formal training programs within the organization, as well as through informal means, such as stories told during the morning coffee break and advice given in the hallways between meetings, or the old, let's meet up at the water cooler. Does anybody still have a water cooler in their library? Yeah, we do. Maybe the most common way to learn and understand organizational culture is through the expression, "That's how we do things around here." Culture shapes the beliefs of organizational members and creates bonds that unite them. Organizational culture may be created over a period, and while it's durable and long-lasting, it can change, albeit slowly, over time. It may also be a jarringly rapid change, such as when a new library director or dean comes on board and the new broom sweeps clean and we've got a new strategic plan. You know what I'm talking about. I see your heads shaking. And the rapid implementation of a new ILS. We had 6 months to implement Alma Primo VE, and that was a really small window of time. But organizational culture is not a one-size-fits-all or no correct or proper standard organizational culture exists. Culture is derived from the history of the organization, and in order to be considered healthy, must allow the organization to achieve its mission. Since the external environment plays an important part in the success or failure of an organization, the culture must also allow the organization to relate and adapt to the surrounding community. The 5th factor, and the one that to me is the most important factor, is the participation of staff, getting staff involved, and creating a synergy. Without the buy-in of staff, change is very difficult and stressful. And some tips to help your staff get involved is to set the expectation of ongoing change with all employees. Listen to your staff concerns about the change. For every change, create an honest, positive and accessible and compelling vision of the intended outcome. Be specific about why and how the change will be implemented. Openly discuss the pros and cons of the proposed changes. Help your staff to manage their fear. And celebrate or recognize the good work that has been done, whether that is, if your library allows gift cards, or if you want to have a party, there's always pizza, any way that you can help your staff realize that I know the good work that's been done. And so in summary, I can only say change is happening to us every day, and we all know that we have to be flexible and ready to accept change before it happens. And my final quote is, "Change before you have to," from Jack Welch, the great American business executive. There are a few sources that I used in my research. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to stand behind the mic. I am going to then go through my slides, and then hopefully we'll again break into song, commiseration, discussion, find out what's going on in your world.
No tears.
No tears. That's for a different session. So one of the things that we've actually, so I'm Corey Seeman, University of Michigan. We're Kresge Library. I don't think I have an about me slide. The Kresge Library is an independent library on campus. We report up to the business school. So we work collaboratively with the main University of Michigan Library, but we are funded by the B School. And for a number of years, that was really fantastic because we were getting budget increases and stuff. And then all of a sudden, one year, it just changed. And so we were dealing with a building project that was made possible by an amazing gift by the namesake of our school, Stephen Ross. But it was a $100 million gift for what was hoped to be a $270 million project. So when you sit there and you start value engineering it down, all of a sudden it's a little less grand, it's a little less big, it's a little less everything people want. And so that's really the main thing that we went through, and that we went through that change in 2013 and 14. It happened very fast, kind of like, I don't know if moving to Alma in 6 months is easier than moving your collection in 6 months, but it was a blast. So what we have here is, what I want to do is talk about a few things today. I've done a little bit of playing in the literature about change management, talk about continuous change, talk about where we are and where we think we are going. And it's not even, we're not even sure necessarily where we're going, but we know it's going to, we know it's going to be different. Talk about a series for Against the Grain. I've broken this down, much like Diane, in 6 key concepts, and we're gonna, the slides will be shared. So continuous change in libraries, this is not a 21st century problem. This is something that we actually goes back quite a lot. And when you sit there and think about when copy cataloging started, local online catalogs versus shared catalogs, all of these represent a lot of change to work, a lot of change to users, expanded access. I remember being a cataloger, so I come back from tech services. Actually, we were both working in Pittsburgh at the same time. We didn't know each other. I was working at the Historical Society, and I was all about, we should add more subject headings. And the cataloger was like, well, I don't know. Like, yeah, let's do it, because we didn't have to actually print up cards. Talking about shared catalogs. The whole notion of what is ownership, the whole notion of do you need to own something in a library, discovery layers, which is something that we've invested a lot of time and money in, working paper management and moving into digital repositories. go back 20 years, no one had food in the library. Now, everyone has food in the library. You have cafes in the library. And it's where I was talking to someone, and it was like increase the foot traffic in the library by like 42%, and I can't remember what university it was, so I apologize. And as a departmental librarian, I'm always concerned about diminished roles that these play. And when we think about how many staff are checking in serials, although I was just joking, I was asked by a PhD student recently about making sure that we had print copies of journals. And I'm like, we haven't had print copies in journals in a long time, and I don't know, I'm gonna try to figure out what the student is hoping to find. But there's an opportunity there, but having print copies is not going to exist because our public space for our library service unit can fit in this room. And so there's not room for journals. And so how many staff are checking in serials now, and so all those things. One of the things I talk about just briefly, because we started talking about the ILS, is I was a trainer for innovative interfaces for 2 years, and I wrote, one of the things I really enjoyed that I wrote was on dealing with change as part of your ILS implementation. And so often people, I called it invisible fences. It was in computers and libraries like in 2007 or something like that. Maybe, no, a long time ago. But anyway, it was all about the fact that when people move from one system to another, the first thing they wanted to do was get the new system to work like the old system. And so my understanding about invisible fences is that they train the dogs where to go, and then after a while you don't need to zap them, which is horrible. I have a puppy, which you'll see in a little bit, and I'm just like, I can't do that. So he drives us crazy with running around the backyard. I think that's an area that we've been dealing with change for a long time. So continuous change in libraries, this is huge. Publishing changes all the time. What to do with OA, we could talk about it at the holistic level, and we could talk about it in our environment. 3 huge things that we're dealing with on a regular basis, space demands. And just a show of hands, how many people here have given up space in their library to something else, a different department, a different, okay, strike that. Who here has not given up space? Maybe that would be an easier, one person. Okay, so out of curiosity, what library?
Getty Research Institute.
Oh, okay, Getty Research Institute. Okay, so in California?
Yeah, but we have real problems with space with physical holdings.
Okay. So,
But not yet given up.
okay, so you have at least one space problem, but
Yeah.
most of us have multiple.
I'm aware.
So thank you for, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but you raised your hand, so I had no choice. So mergers of ceased operations, that I think is something that's going to be huge. We were talking earlier about what's going to happen just in the state university systems in our 2 states. Carnegie Mellon is a private school, but there are so many public campuses in Pennsylvania, it's not clear whether the state has the desire, the interest to support all of them. And so what will that happen? Our campus systems in Michigan also were built for a post-World War II student population. And that's sort of come and gone. And so that's an interesting dynamic. One of the other things, funding of new priorities. We're a little closer to, we don't report up to the provost, we report up to the business school dean through an associate dean. And so when the business school wants to do a priority, it becomes, we become part of the budget that would allow them to explore the possibility of shifting money around. And so, but change is a dual-edged sword. I have 2 examples here. Vibrant schools will demand more change than stagnant ones. And so we actually have a huge investment in digital education. We've created, actually Tepper has a really big online MBA program.
Yeah.
And so now does Michigan. So we're actually very competitive here. So we shouldn't be on the same panel.
But we
but-
can work together.
We can work together, or B schools probably can't. But the Ross School of Business is moving into digital ed. We have our first online cohort this year. And in order to create that, what they did was they actually shrunk our space a little bit. And it's funny too, because we gave up a lot of space during this construction. We thought, okay, we're done. But then basically last year, they made us a little closer to our neighbors, and so they could bring in the digital ed group. There's been some really good benefit by being in the room with them, but it's been a little tough because we're just a lot of people in a smaller space. Conversely, I was talking to a colleague yesterday who was saying that people on campus are generally happy that there's plenty of parking. And if you are on a commuter campus and there's plenty of parking, you've got a serious problem. They're down 1,000 students, and they're actually saw a reduction in about 150 staff. So it is, yeah, maybe that's the silver lining, but it's not. It's not really a long-term benefit. And I draw connections to Sears, and what they're doing is they keep cutting and cutting and cutting. We don't even have a Sears in Ann Arbor anymore, which is kind of sad. So one of the things that I did was I wanted to look at change management in library. Can everyone hear me okay? I want to make sure. I'm going to move this mic. So what I did was I did a keyword search. This is through Tax Day 2009 in Library Literature and Information Science Index. And I looked at library, I looked at all these terms and I said, how many things do we have there? And change management is 248, and this is just a keyword search. Squirrels, I'm all about the squirrels, as you can see. There's 181 things, because you get a lot of book reviews in there. So there's 181 things about squirrels, but there's 210 things on Second Life. Oh man, Second Life was going to be the answer for all of us, because we could all be, we could be a librarian with wings, and that would actually be cooler. So you can see all the different ways, and it really struck me that this didn't have as much, that there wasn't as much of a connection. When I start taking this to the next level, I'm going to rerun these numbers. I did it also in Lista, and change management did a little better. They beat out tenure, but they're only twice as good as Second Life, and 3 times better than squirrels, but it's way less fun. But you can see that there's a real, it's very dynamic. And I think that as we look at this, there doesn't seem to be a great attention in the field for this. And yet, it is something that we have been living through, and it's something that we think is actually going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So what I've been doing, and in Against the Grain, Katina talked me into writing something, and I don't know why. I hope it's good. Squirreling Away, Managing Information Resources in Libraries. And it's all about the sort of the intersection of business, and it's not really Charleston Advisor stuff, but it's really just about sort of businessy topics. And I have a great deal of latitude, and I can write really about anything. And I've been doing it for about 1.5 years. And so what I did was I've been thinking all along about these 6 ideas that I have, much like the 5 ideas we saw before. What are the key concepts? And so the way I see it, and I've broken this down into different Against the Grain stories, and what I'm hoping to do is actually piece it together into a briefing. So the key concept 1 is I think it's inevitability, that this is in our future. And it may not be, I'm 55 years old. I'm going to retire in 13, 14, 15 years or so. I could wait it out, or it could happen to me. I mean, these kinds of things will be very likely. On the bottom, there's a picture of Bay City, Michigan. Has anyone been to Bay City, Michigan? Okay. It's beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. But there's so many old buildings because there haven't been new buildings there hasn't been a pressure to actually you know, there have been new businesses, new corporations come in. So that's the dual-edged sword of having a historic district in that city. And that's a picture of just the beautiful still on the Saginaw River. I think it's Saginaw River. The groundhog doesn't predict if winter will end, but when. And it actually doesn't really do that, but anyway, you get the idea. So I think that a lot of librarians think that change won't happen to them, and I'm here to say it probably will. And if you think long enough, it might. And we talk about 10, 15 years for some monograph use. That may not work in the window of what's going to happen down the road. I think departmental libraries are the canaries in the coal mines. And so what's happening to us is really very interesting. And actually, this is another Pittsburgh connection. Oh God, I haven't said that in a long time. In the news, they always talk about, and in Indonesia, there was this problem. And the Pittsburgh connection was someone from Indonesia went to Pitt. And that's basically always a Pittsburgh connection. But Fred Rogers in the documentary, he was talking about, we deal with his job is to work with students dealing with the difficult modulations of life. And that's sort of how I see this. And a child's going to grow, and they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to do all those things. And it's up to us as professionals and managers to do that as well, because things will change, and they're going to change more frequently. Rapidity is the second key element. One of the things is that the pace of change that a library goes through can really depend. And there's a picture of an orchestra. That is actually a high school, now a middle school orchestra that was for a demonstration. And the demonstration was about how fast a group can play music. And I thought it was fascinating. And so one of those kids is my older son. I think he's in the back, probably sulking. But he plays the cello. He's tremendous. And what they did was, the person who was conducting the group said, basically, a group can only play as fast as the section with the most difficult part. So you think about a library, when you think about a group going through an ILS is critical for the way that a lot of things flow through a library. If you're going to go through change, and you need to give the group enough time to work through those changes, you can't move faster than that group. You have to give them the space to learn and the space to do that. So I was looking at the tempo of a piece is the term, but the actual time, and I used Canon, Paco Bell, and I looked at some different timings in the Naxos Music Library for all the exact same piece, all done by professional orchestras, and you see all these different timings. Some people have slowed it down, some people have sped it up. And so I think that's fairly interesting. And then I talked also about the changes coming from the University of California with Elsevier, which ties very nicely to this morning's talk. I don't know yet exactly how things have manifested, still in the early stages. But the third concept is flexibility, and this is in this month's, or the one that's in your conference packet. That's my puppy, Runyon, who is, having a puppy in your house is all about flexibility. And so I always try to have a squirrel in the picture, and that's a toy squirrel that we got on the first day. And you have to accept the things that we are. If you've ever tried to train a puppy, you know how maddening that can be. And so, you know, I would love him to be able to do some things. I would love him. We adopted him. They said he was around 6 months old. He was house trained, and he knew math. None of those things were true. None of those things. He's shown progress on the first two. I don't know about math. I don't think that's ever going to happen. What do we need to walk away from? That's the thing that we did. I went to a session on textbooks, and they were talking about reserves. We had reserves, and we would always do that to support students, and we stopped doing it because we didn't have the space to do it. So that's a real challenge. Librarians are very uncomfortable with eliminating a service, even if it's, because there's always one person that really relies on it, and we use that, and that's so important. And that's great about librarians. The future ones, next issue, I'm going to talk about hospitality. It's really hard to be a welcoming force in your library when you're not feeling as though you're supported. That's one of the real challenges here, and so how we navigate that. Our library survived because of our service. And the story of a student interview is actually something that just took place last month. We had a student who came in who needed to do an interview. And we have all open office, including myself. And so I have what I call an officicle, which is a cube with a 7-foot wall as opposed to a 5-foot wall. And we have a 14-foot ceiling, so it's not I don't have conversations in there. But we had a student who needed to do an interview and had nowhere to go. There were no rooms available and was really panicked. And so one of our librarians basically said, "Oh, I know this librarian is out today. Why don't you work at his desk?" And the librarian whose desk it was like, "Awesome, I would have totally done that also." And there was a question in the group, should we have done that? And I'm like, of course we should. Of course we should, because we've been on that side. We've been there where we've needed the help. And maybe that student will remember this one day, and it'll be something, and maybe it'll kick in down the road. But that's all about being hospitable, even when your situation isn't ideal. Accountability is really important, and it ties with metrics. Your metrics are going to change. The things that we count and the things that you do are going to be very, very different as you go through change. And what it may mean is that you're disconnected from the old life. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be able to basically run like a mulligan. I don't golf, but I assume that that's the way that you would do it. Dashboard indicators are really, everyone loves dashboard indicators. About a mile, no, less than a mile, it's like 2 blocks from here. My mom lives in Charleston, and we were at a stop sign. I've used this picture before, and we were rear-ended by another car. So our dashboard looked great. The person behind us just wasn't paying attention. So that was like our very first day ever in Charleston, back about 7-8 years, or about 10 years ago, before I started coming to the conference. It was really a wonderful experience. Lastly, empathy is the 6th big concept, and this is really important for staff, for your patrons, for everyone. It's really easy to get mad at someone who's asking for print when you don't have room for print. It's easy to get frustrated with people, but everyone's going through change very differently, and everyone's going through it in a different spot. And so this is actually where I think it's so critical that we need to be we need to basically be very concerned about where everyone is. And also, one of the other dynamics is that if we're more empathetic to staff, we might be less empathetic to our patrons. So we need to find that balance. And that's always a balancing act. So the key outcomes, change is and will be a considerate part of our work. We went through a huge change, and things are still changing. While our predecessors were building a library that would stand the test of time, we may not have all those options, especially with digital collections. When you think about a book on a shelf can sit there for a long time. I think, and this is where I can get a little more controversial, I think we need a shorter time horizon sometimes when we're thinking about our activities. We can't buy a book and hope that someone checks it out in 10 years. I don't think that is, it's our administrators who are interested in quicker return on investment. And we shouldn't let the things that we've done in the past be a prison, hence the squirrel in bars, for what we do in the future. And so what I'm hoping to do, and I'm hoping to actually piece this together for the Charleston Briefings, and we're going to hopefully have the series done next year, but I'm also hoping to hear from others to sort of flesh these out. I think it's fascinating, and I think it's an area that we really are going to find ourselves dealing with more and more, especially as and we sit there and think about all the changes that are happening in the space. So what I'm going to do is actually jump to the other slide deck, because that has has Denise's contact as well as mine. I'm just going to leave this up. Okay. So now, I've kind of burned through maybe half of our time, so maybe I talked a little longer, I apologize. What we'd like to do is find out what kinds of changes that you're looking at, what kinds of obstacles that you are going through, and maybe we can have a joint therapy session, or and just try to maybe see what we're missing. One of the dynamics also that when you're at a Michigan or a CMU, you're pretty blessed in having, when I have 3 budget cuts in a row, it's starting from a pretty decent budget. When you actually have a pretty modest budget and you have 2 or 3 in a row, it's devastating. So everyone knows their own experience, and so, but it's always good to know what else is going on. So with that, does anyone have, would anyone like to share? Or I'm going to call on you. No, I'm not. Yes.
I'll jump in.
Okay. Oh, and if you could state your name and your library?
Sure. Tony Zanders, I'm with Boston University Libraries. I've been there for 6 months. My role is an entrepreneur in residence, and it's a new role to help the libraries prepare for the future of work. The university librarian, Dr. Matthew Dames, came from Georgetown last July. He had 3 AUL slots. 1 was vacant for a year by that point. A second had already announced retirement, and the third is still there, but may have retirement plans in the future, near future. So that's what he inherited. And so that plus the university is going through a strategic planning process. This is the first time the library's been invited to participate in that. On the heels of a $1 billion fundraising campaign, we did $1.8 billion, so successful campaign, largest student class. So a lot of things are happening on campus, but the libraries are haven't really caught up to peer units on campus, like the IT department and Office of Research. So we're right in the thick of this. I don't have many updates besides it being exciting, and I'm here to learn how you've navigated it, and you're kind of on the other side of it.
That sounds, thank you very much. I mean, it sounds really, on the one hand, when we were going through this change, most people are like, oh my God, this is awful. One person said, this is exciting. And so it's a lot of it is perspective. A lot of it is where things are. When you look at the opportunities that you may have when you're moving in that direction, I think organizational change can be really, really important. And for BU's a really big school, but it's also in a very, very crowded Boston collegiate area. One of the things that we're always very interested in, and I'll hand it over to Denise, one of the things that we're always interested is trying to be responsive. On the one hand, our strategic plan is basically to support the school. And we have never set up our own strategic plan just because we didn't want to go straight when the school is turning right or left. And so that becomes very important insofar as what we're doing. And disconnecting from something that you may have already been doing year in, year out is very, very difficult. But you always have to look at, and you don't want to necessarily be driven by return on investment, but fundamentally that's what the provosts and the deans are going to be looking at. There was a really good blog post by Chris Borg when she was at Stanford, and it was about how ROI killed the library. And it's fascinating, but on the other hand, it's really tricky to put those things in balance, especially when you're trying to build a service that's engaged in the community as a whole.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you're in a good spot because you have a new dean, and he can with all those AUL positions that are open or might be opening, he has an opportunity to share a new vision and to dovetail the library's strategic plan to the universities. I know that that's something that we did when we had our new president, Farnham Jahanian, who came to us from University of Michigan.
Wow,
And he'd been at the
Pittsburgh
NSF.
connection.
Yeah, well, yeah, another Pittsburgh connection. But, you know, he shared his vision, we wrote a new strategic plan, and our dean dovetailed ours into that. And we've been given a lot of support, and we actually have a dedicated part-time advancement person in our library. She's in my department right now because I had an empty space. But we find that to be very exciting, that we're actually going to be included in the public part of a $2 billion capital campaign that's just started. So we're really excited about it. We have a lot of transitions going on in the library right now, which are scary but exciting too.
That's encouraging,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yes?
So I'm from MCLS in Michigan.
Oh, okay, excellent.
And so I have worked in libraries in the past and experienced a lot of change there, but I'm kind of interested in your thoughts about, you know, at MCLS we got a new executive director and
Scott Garrison.
yeah, and he's
Oh, wow.
he's great, and you know people are really excited, but I know my staff, it's that like when you're doing an ILS, you have an end result, right? You're gonna have
Yeah.
a new ILS. But you get a new person, like an executive director, and you don't really know what the change is going to be, right? And I know my staff is often saying to me, well, what's going to happen? And everybody's wondering, and how are things going to be different? And, you know, just that idea of change that's not defined, right? You can't anticipate. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, would you like to go?
Transparency.
Yeah.
I mean, has your new director met with all the staff?
Yep, he has. Mm-hmm.
And seems
Yep.
to be open and
Yep.
to
Mhm.
suggestions and.
Yep, he had one-on-ones with all the staff, and
Okay.
I just know there's just kind of this level of anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah,
know,
it's
and-
always there.
Right.
Yeah.
And people are, and I think, you know, as the manager of my team, they come to me and they, you know, they're not going to him necessarily. So yeah, I just kind of wondered when it's kind of a unknown what the result is going to be. Like for you, you know, I guess you knew you were going to not have your physical space, but there were things that were unknown probably.
Yeah. Well, so one of the interesting dynamics is that more and more of us are dealing with relatively short-term administrators. So we had a new dean after 5 years. Also, our new dean is also Scott, not the same Scott. But one of the things that's really, so Randy Dykes was there.
Yeah,
like,
20 plus years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, but in the interim, so this is MCLS, which is the
Consortia.
licensing consortia. But it used to be Michigan, the M used to be Michigan, but now it's Midwest because it's Michigan and Indiana.
Right.
So that in and of itself represented a change.
Yeah.
And so it's really with each step, you sort of, the way I cross a stream when I'm out hiking or so, you put your foot and you sort of, you steady it and then you move the other foot. And you're always hoping to find that as you go through it. And new leadership can be tough. And I've seen a lot in academic librarianship. You have a lot of people who spend the first year sitting there listening to people, and then they want to make some changes because they're getting pressure to create something, and then 2 years later they leave, and so there's that dynamic. But one of the things that we have done, I mean, you know, just when you think things are like settled, is when, you know, then that's when you sort of have to, you know, ready yourself for something. And it may not be something dramatic, but I think transparency is really important, and it's up and down. You know, why are we doing the things that we're doing, and what value is being received? So the MCLS training, the access to databases, those kinds of things. And it's not to get the director to say everything is perfect. You want to find out what her or his vision for the future of the organization is. But certainly as you sort of navigate that, keeping that open dialogue is really important. Scott paid us a visit not that long ago,
Okay.
and so it was really nice just to talk with him, and,
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing, it's a positive, and I think most
Yeah.
people feel that, but there is, I guess, that just anxiety that is gonna exist because of the change.
yeah,
That's always there.
yeah. Because, I mean, a lot of people want to make a name for themselves, and some people want to move on, and so, the notion, we have a great dean who's got big plans, and it's involved reinvestment. And so some of those things have worked out well to our advantage, and other things maybe less so. But it doesn't really matter, we just have to keep doing, and we can only do what we have the capacity and the resources to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Kind of piggybacking off of the last thing you just said, so I'm A.J. Pesky, I'm from Memorial Library in northwestern Georgia, and one of the issues that we've had is we've lost about half of our staff due to retirements and various illnesses or whatever. We've had budget cuts consistently for the last 9 years, and we have some new college leadership, not the president, but we report directly to the provost, who has started to imply that there's some vestigiality to the library. And we've been doing our best to, keep up with everything, and we've been able to keep all of the same services. But that's getting to its breaking point, and the anticipation is that it's going to become in the mind of the provost, that it might become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You see it as vestigial, the funding's not there, we do what we can, eventually things break. And we're kind of trying to navigate all of that. It's kind of one of those, any advice kind of thing.
Wow, and that's actually where anyone could, 9 budget cuts in a row, or is it 9 years of
So
budget?
it was a quote flat budget for 3 years, because I just finished doing a 10-year budget analysis.
Okay,
And then and I had been told that it had been a flat budget for the last 10 years, but when I actually looked at it in its granularity, we were looking at about a 1 to 2% budget cut every year. And given that, I'm sure as everybody here knows,
Yeah.
just even journal increases themselves can be 4 to 5%.
Oh, yeah.
So we're having to negotiate incredibly hard. We're having to play hardball in many ways. And thankfully, our director's a great negotiator, and we're able to kind of push that envelope with the vendors to a point. But it's as we have less and less, because we're at the point now where we need 2 more librarians. I've been working in libraries for 12 years. I've kind of been functioning as a librarian, but they pay me as a librarian. It's just become a situation where a lot of people are running out of hours. We're running out of steam, really, is what it comes down to. We're trying to not burn out.
well, God, I wish I had an answer, easy one, because respite is really important, and making sure that you don't have, one of the things that's funny in the academic life cycle, there are these gaps, and there's busy times and slow times, and faculty have even more so. For us, we're 12-month appointments basically, and so summer's not as busy, but it's still, we're busier than we once were. The one thing that is very tricky is that self-fulfilling prophecy. You make cuts over years, and then you're like, oh my gosh, this is not working. We don't have a library that's actually functioning. And so that's actually the sort of the 1,000 cuts of death, which is, I would rather, and we had all our space basically taken at once.
And that's what's happening now. We're having our entire first floor basically taken from us.
Okay, well, they don't give you money for books, and then they sit around and goes, all these books are old!
That's exactly what happened.
Okay, so, I had no idea this was coming up, but that's very typical. That's a real problem, and that's actually where, trying to find some advocates on the faculty side could potentially be where things are settled, but also, after these cuts, and when you have retirements and you can't fill positions or departures or illnesses, you need to be able to figure out what you can do. One of the things that I shared, and I'll let Denise talk for a second, one of the things that I talked about is, what do you give up? What do you give up? And so, you know, for us it was reserves. We wanted to bring it back, and we just said we don't have space for it. And,
We gave up most of our first floor too. We gave it up to the Global Communications Center, which was a writing center, so we gave up several feet of what had been our reserve section, which we really have online reserves, but we don't have book reserves any longer. And then there was a new major that came on board called ID8, which is like interdisciplinary across the board with art and maker spaces and all that kind of stuff. So we gave up our whole, there are 2 big classroom studios on the first floor, and we gave up part of our basement for all of the 3D printers and the wood, you know, all of that mechanical stuff. So we've managed to create a synergy with them, and the Global Communications Center is moving because the new business school was built, which left their old building and which has been remodeled, and they're going to be moving out. But we have had some negotiation with them, and now our dean is actually one of the people in charge of ID8 and the Entertainment Technology Center. So it gives us a leg up to negotiating for space and meetings in those rooms and that sort of thing. And just keep pushing. Meet with faculty, get them, do you have a faculty senate? Go to the faculty
Yeah,
senate.
we do. I'm actually in the process of trying to build connections with faculty, mostly because I come from a science and humanities background, where most of our librarians are coming from a humanities background, so I'm able to kind of build the connections with science folks as well, and trying to pull people in to kind of see like, hey, this is your space, and we want to keep it your space, and we want to make, you know, we're looking forward actually to the changes, because that whole first floor is going to become more student focused, which is great, and we're excited about those changes. But we're a 2-floor building that we're eventually only going to have like the back part of our library for books. So it's trying to find what faculty are needing and students are needing, and it's difficult when there's 10 of us now. So
the opportunity, and we can open it up. The opportunity is to use this as a way to reach out to the faculty, not to, oh my God, look what they're doing to us, but
Yeah.
to say, hey,
Yeah.
And
this
that's
is
how
happening.
we've been that's how I've been trying to phrase it, like, we want to continue this collaboration because we're having other places come in, and we're trying to frame it as a collaborative effort, because it is.
You want to keep it
And-
positive,
Yeah,
you know.
and so how can we collaborate with your department, how can we collaborate with your department and kind of pull everybody in to really make the library, it's literally the center of the campus, you know, make it continue to be the center of the campus for everybody.
Yeah, just keep making those connections. Have your dean, library director talk before the faculty senate, say, this is what we're facing, this is what we want to do, we'd like to have your input, your collaboration. All you can do is just keep moving forward as much as you can.
Yeah, we're trying not to stagnate.
Yeah, that's hard.
But yes, reaction. So James King, NIH, just hearing your story, it sounds like your administration doesn't value what you're providing. Or they don't see value in the print books, but what do they value? I mean, how are you showing value to the people at the campus, both on the student side and the faculty side? And you'll get ahead of the continuous cuts and, you know, plant the vision, because you've clearly shown they can survive with half the staff. Whether they
Yeah.
wanted to do that or not.
Well, that was the
do
problem.
that.
We've
So-
shown we can do a lot more.
So now you'll,
Yeah.
so, you know, if nothing gets cut and nothing gets impacted, except if you continue to shrink, they're like, oh, well, good, they can get by without it.
Yeah.
So how do you get ahead of this and paint a vision that shows, you know, maybe it is mostly ebooks and online journals and so forth, but more of a virtual library, and what are the services? Is it bioinformatics? Is it, you know, what that they need that maybe you're not providing right now, and shifting the staffing to teach more or whatever, you know, they need.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, my name's Maureen Heredia. I'm at the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center in St. Louis. We're a nonprofit genetics research institute. We're fairly new. We've only been around about 22 years. And I am a solo there. I am the only librarian. And so what I get is this whole, they don't understand how libraries function at all. But you know what I always go back to, and this is ancient, and those of you of a certain age will remember, and maybe other people will not. Anybody remember Herb White?
Oh, yes.
And he used to tell people, for God's sake, quit sacrificing. Because what happens is librarians tend to be nice people. We tend to be helping people. And then when an administration comes down and they say, well, you can't have this, you have to lose this, we think, but we can't let the students suffer. We'll do this, we'll do that. And the particular thing that he wrote about this one time, and I was only like 2 years out of library school when he said this, and it stuck with me so hard. It was a situation of a public library that had had their city budget cut, and the librarian said they would keep the library open on Sunday by working for free. And he basically went back with, are you out of your minds? Don't do that. And something happened to me this past year, and I just basically decided, okay, if they won't give me the money, they're going to suffer the consequences. And in this particular case, it was American Chemical Society stuff, and y'all know how expensive that is.
Oh, yeah.
And we had been forced to go to a pay-per-view version on American Chemical Society. We ran out of money in September. It was gone. And I very apologetically sent an institution-wide email that said, I'm sorry, but we've lost access to the American Chemical Society. You know, basically, we're so sorry, and we'll do interlibrary loan when we can, but there's no more instant access to the American Chemical Society. Within 3 hours, I had my funding fully restored.
Yay. For you.
Because there was a riot.
That's great.
And it hit them straight where they lived, and at that point they said, well, that can't be. And I said, well, all I need is money. And, you know, comparatively, it was a tiny amount of money. But because it was going to the library, their perception was,
We can cut it.
nah, we can cut this, we can find it somewhere
Yeah.
else. And, you know, it hit them where it hurt, and they folded. So sometimes you just got to get up to the line and say,
Stand your ground.
you know, you have to stand your ground, and you have to say, no, can't do that, won't do that. It isn't possible.
Librarians are pretty hard-coded to bend over backwards and do the right thing, and you know, it's kind of funny, but you see it everywhere. You see it in different library types, and it's a good bad habit, but it's
We
I
shoot
see it-
ourselves in the foot, though, by doing that, all the time.
Yes.
So I'm Krista Popper, and I'm from the College of Charleston Libraries. I think it's lovely if anyone has downtime in the summer. We have no downtime at all now, okay? Even when there's not a soul in the library, we are moving to a new ILS, the Discovery Service. We're looking at other options to easy proxy. We're, you know, maintaining the 20 gazillion LibGuides. Even if there's not one foot in the library, we are not down. And of course, they keep adding things. High school programs, writers' retreats, you name it. And we get to support all of that. Plus meet all the qualifications for tenure and promotion with publications in service. So my question is, what does everybody do to combat the fatigue?
I use my vacation time. They give it to me. No, let me rephrase that. I earned it, I take it. And I don't let them tell me that I can't take it.
That's a good point.
Because if they don't realize the stress that they have put you under, and it's normally not other library staff, it's normally people that never actually step foot in a library. If they don't realize what it is that you do, and you burn out and you leave, then there's a bigger problem. And other people do what they've had to do, and they pick up the slack, and then they don't replace you. It is better for you to be gone for a week than for you to get burnt out and be done. I've had too many friends that left the library world because they felt like there was one more thing.
It's too
It
exhausting.
was always going to be one more thing, and one more thing, and one more thing. And my friends that are teachers have done the same thing because we're all in the education realm, and we are devalued. So don't let them devalue you. Take the time when you need it.
That's a great point.
Yes.
Hi, Dee Clarkin from the NOAA Library in Silver Spring, Maryland, and we're a federal library. And I think something is interesting. First of all, I love this. I thought this was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I think we're also hard-coded to be so excited when somebody comes to us and asks the library to do something that is, seems kind of exciting and sexy. And, I had, we've become sort of experts in our library on Section 508 and ensuring that our documents are 508 compliant, so because we run a publications repository for the agency. So our CIO contacted me and mentioned one of my staff. He said, it seems like Dixie is super expert with Section 508. How would she like to be in charge of, making web pages, Section 508 compliant? And it's like, do you think I'm stupid? First of all, that was a whole position in his shop. So anyway, there's some things that you just have to, this would never go over in other business units in the agency. They would, laugh or whatever, the person out of their office. So of course I said no. And my person actually was, this would be an opportunity. I was like, well, yeah, but opportunities also need to come with support. And it got, I was kind of interested in crafting a response, something like, I'm assuming you will be transferring funding from your office to me, but then I just was like, no thanks. And I think we have to be really careful about, what we take on. And although and one other thing I want to say, I think Corey said it, change before you have to. And was that Denise? I think
Actually,
that,
it was Jack Welch who said
Jack
that.
Welch, that's right. Jack Welch, I knew there was so I think that is so completely valid in the library world. I think I've worked really hard, our team has worked really hard to almost be like a moving target, right? So like we are constantly identifying things ourselves. Okay, we're gonna stop doing this, or we're gonna, we're getting rid of the print collection. We haven't been asked to do that. We know we will be facing space cuts. I said to our staff, there's no way we're gonna wait for someone to tell us. Because no one's using the parts of the print collection, so what are we waiting for?
Well, along those lines, it's really interesting when you sit there and think about the future. I think about NOAA, so you're thinking of storm tracks, and the models are so beautiful, and sometimes they hit Alabama, and sometimes they don't. But it's always really interesting when you see that the storm tracks develop, and it's not, it doesn't come on a schedule. And so, you sit there, and my mom lives here in Charleston, and so she's had to evacuate once a year, and my stepdad is in a wheelchair, so it's really difficult. And they end up going to a hotel by the airport, and I was thinking, that's not enough of an evacuation, but apparently it is. But it's really tough, and you don't necessarily know what's coming down the pike. And the challenge is when you do take on something, the other point is when you're asked to take on something else, I do this with my staff and with my team. If I ask someone to take on something, I basically say, what do we give up? And so it's not someone feeling that they have to juggle. And so it's, you're looking at things, and are we getting value at that? Are you individually getting value? Maybe it's not a direction that an individual wants to see her or his career go in. So I think that's really fascinating. But libraries are being asked to do all sorts of things. In fact, if we look around the room, if we were here 20 years ago, all of our libraries would probably be more similar than they are right now. We're all doing different things. A lot of people are moving in different directions, But it's really, I think, very, very interesting that what we think of as a library is not necessarily what's in all of our different institutions. Yes?
Ashley, I'm from Stetson College of Law in Florida. I have a statement and a question. So I think that in our library and in a lot of libraries, we have a no problem, where people ask us to do something, we say no problem. Never explain how much work it takes to get done the thing that is being done. And I have been trying to encourage the people that report to me to explain, especially the faculty, here are all the avenues that we went to get you what you need, so they understand the work that goes into
Like
it.
an hour statement,
Right.
that's what we started doing.
The problem I have is that the reference librarians especially love it when the faculty say, you're like magic. They don't want to explain that there's work involved because they like this idea of them being this mythical, super knowledgeable, very fancy queen of reference. We have a librarian who
Don't look at the man
herself
behind
as
the curtain.
queen of reference. She doesn't want to explain to anybody how much time it takes for her to do her job. I think part of it is because we would then realize that she has a lot of time with it, right? But how do we get people to get over that? The idea of being this mystical, wonderful thing. Like I don't know how to get people to knock it
It's
off.
not business-like.
It's not at
That's
all.
That's what we do these in-depth bibliographies, and when we deliver them to the customer, we also give them a summary of how many hours it took. And sometimes we've had like panicked phone calls, you know, like, how much are you gonna, how much are you going to bill us? And I was like, no, we just want you to know that we saved your staff. I mean, they obviously didn't read the thing we put on it, which was that we saved your staff 25 hours.
Well, so
And
we do
at,
bill.
you know,
We bill.
oh, well, if you bill,
Yeah, we
that's
have,
that.
because we
It's
allow outside
clear cut.
entities to utilize
Yeah.
us. We're a medical library, and so we
Okay.
have a lot of law firms that come to us for medical research. And we have a billing module, and it was actually put in place by the former president, not even by the library director, because I really think our library director would be like, we're helping.
Right.
He wants to help. He doesn't ever say no. We are now in charge of all institutional records except medical records. We handle all of that, and they handed that to our poor brand new archivist, like her second week of work. By the way, you can do this too, right? And she has a part-time assistant that has no experience in archives. And so now I'm brought on board and I am her backup. So he doesn't understand how to say no, but for the reference librarians, they bill for research work. For the technical services staff, if we have to do work for other departments or a law library, or we do not get to bill.
Interesting.
So somehow our work is not as important because it's not front facing, or it is devalued because, well, it was just some stuff on the computer. So we're actually working through that process to explain more to the people that don't work within technical services what it is that we do, so that our work can be as valuable as the billing hours that we produce for other people. It's slow.
That's old, though. I can remember having that happen to me 25 years ago or so. There was a situation of raises. You know, we only have a certain percentage of raise we can give.
Yeah.
And I swear to you, the administration says, but all the public services people are getting 2% more than technical services across the board because they deal with the public.
Yeah, well, they do
Well,
with the
it's
public
not.
with resources
do
that
that
the tech
too, every day.
services people prepare. You need to have both sides. And that's actually, I mean, one of the things that I do is I always ask people before I ever agree to do anything, because I am one of those people that will say yes to anything. You know, short of, you know, lighting my hair on fire, what's left of it. But the thing that I always do is before I say absolute yes, I bring it back, I ask my team. And my team is a bunch of realists, and they will actually say, you're an idiot, don't do this, this is bad, or, you know, we'll trade and we'll try to figure out what we can do. But it also gives me time to get a better understanding of what the resources would be needed. And that's really challenging, especially because I think a lot of libraries are taking on these other kinds of responsibilities. And that's really fascinating. I think we have time for a couple more
Getting
comments.
back to your question about what to do, how to get them to change their mindset, okay? So, we're all struggling with this. Due to limited staffing, it's not in our scope of service to do bibliographies for faculty. We have so many students to teach that we just cannot spend the time to do this. Well, I got wind that one of our branch librarians was doing this for a faculty, and I'm thinking to myself, okay. So I talked to that librarian, and I said, now let's think about it. I really need you not to do that because it will set up an expectation for faculty at the main campus that we have staffing to do this, and we don't, so we need to be consistent in our scope of service throughout all the branches, okay? I said, now think about it. Wouldn't you rather develop a credit-bearing course that students on all campuses would benefit? Because we teach online now. Most of our library classes, we have a couple of face-to-face, but most of our library classes are online. Now, wouldn't you rather spend your time developing a class that would benefit all the students, a much greater number of people than just one faculty member, and you'd be earning money for the institution because the students are paying dollars, and of course, now if you think about it in your promotion packet, what do you think is going to go off better with the provost? Bibliography for a faculty member that the provost never sees, or students who are graduating because they took your course? Well, that's a really good point. Terrific. So she's developing a new course, right? So, maybe that will help kind of set the big picture in the institution and where we ought to be spending our time and what we ought to be doing, and maybe that will help.
Thank you.
So I think we're at our time.
Yes, we are.
So thank you for being a lively group.
Yes, thank
So
you
you
so
guys
much.
win. I don't know what you win, but thank you very much. And I think we'll hang out. Denise and I will hang out for a little bit. Then we'll share the slides through Sched, I think, and probably through the some. Yeah. So I don't know if it'll capture everything, but thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day.